The cold metal walls of the alien ship seemed to press closer as Captain Jake Morrison slowly opened his eyes. His head throbbed with pain, and the taste of blood filled his mouth. The last thing he remembered was the flash of energy weapons, as their peaceful diplomatic shuttle was torn apart by the gray ships that had surrounded them without warning. Jake tried to move, but found himself trapped in some kind of glowing energy cage that hummed with power. The blue light made his skin tingle, and every time he pushed against it, sharp pain shot through his body. Across the dark room, he could see another energy prison, and his heart sank when he recognized the person inside. Dr. Elena Rodriguez hung motionless in her glowing cage, her once neat brown hair now tangled and stained with dried blood. Elena was the mission's lead scientist, a brilliant woman who had spent years studying alien languages and cultures in preparation for this first contact mission. She had been so excited about meeting a new species, so hopeful that they could build bridges between their worlds. The creatures that had captured them moved around the room with silent efficiency. The Vextari were tall and thin, with gray skin that looked almost like metal in the harsh light. Their large black eyes showed no emotion as they studied their human prisoners. Their leader, who wore more elaborate clothing than the others, approached Elena's cage with what looked like medical instruments in his long fingers. Primitive species, the alien spoke in perfect English, his voice making a strange hissing sound. Your kind sent messages claiming great resilience and strength. We shall discover the truth of these claims through proper scientific methods. Jake struggled against his prison, shouting warnings and threats, but the aliens paid him no attention. They focused entirely on Elena, who had awakened and was watching them with steady, unafraid eyes. Even trapped and injured, she maintained the calm dignity that had made her such a respected scientist back on Earth. The lead researcher, who the others called Commander Veltar, activated his instruments. Strange devices began scanning Elena's body, while others prepared syringes filled with glowing liquids. Jake watched in horror as they began their terrible work. For the next 37 minutes, Jake was forced to witness unspeakable cruelty. The aliens tested Elena's pain tolerance, injected her with chemicals that made her body convulse, and used devices that seemed to directly stimulate her nervous system. They recorded every reaction, took samples of her blood and tissue, and spoke among themselves in their own language, while treating her like nothing more than a laboratory animal. Through it all, Elena never screamed. She never begged or pleaded, or showed the fear that Jake knew she must be feeling. Instead, she kept her eyes fixed on her torturers, with a strength that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her soul. Sometimes she would look over at Jake, and give him a small nod, as if to say that everything would be okay. The alien scientists grew frustrated with Elena's lack of response to their torture. They increased the intensity of their experiments, using more painful devices and stronger chemicals. Jake could see Elena's body beginning to fail, her breathing becoming shallow and her skin growing pale. Still, she refused to give them the satisfaction of breaking. As the torture continued, something strange began to happen. Elena's eyes seemed to grow brighter, not with pain, but with something else entirely. She began to whisper words that Jake couldn't quite hear, speaking in a language that didn't sound like any human tongue he knew. The aliens noticed this too, and moved closer to record whatever she was saying. Commander Veltar leaned in close to Elena's face, his black eyes reflecting the light from her energy prison. What are you saying, primitive creature? Are these the sounds your species makes when facing death? Elena turned her gaze directly to the commander, and for a moment, Jake could have sworn he saw something ancient and powerful looking out through her eyes. When she spoke, her voice was steady and clear, despite her obvious pain. You have no idea what you've just awakened, she said, each word carefully pronounced. You think you understand death, but you know nothing about what lies beyond it. Nothing about what connects us all. The aliens exchanged glances, clearly puzzled by her words. They continued their experiments, pushing Elena's body to its absolute limits. Jake watched helplessly as the woman he had come to respect and admire slowly slipped away from him. At exactly 2:47 by the alien station's time display, Elena's vital signs finally flatlined. The monitoring devices around her cage showed nothing but flat lines where her heartbeat and brain activity should have been. She was gone. Commander Veltar made notes on his electronic tablet while his assistants prepared to move Elena's body to what looked like an examination table. They seemed satisfied with their work, having gathered extensive data about human physiology and pain tolerance. They spoke among themselves in pleased tones, apparently considering their experiment a complete success. But Jake felt something wrong in the air around them. Despite Elena's death, despite the aliens' satisfaction with their cruel work, he couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just begun rather than ended. Elena's final words echoed in his mind, and he wondered what she had meant about awakening something. As the aliens continued their preparations, Jake stared at Elena's still form and waited for whatever was coming next. Commander Veltar sat in his private study, carefully examining the data from their recent experiment on the human female. The readings were fascinating in their own way. Human pain tolerance was higher than expected, and their cardiovascular systems showed remarkable efficiency even under extreme stress. He made notes on his electronic tablet, planning to submit a full report to the Vextari Science Council. The human specimens had proven more interesting than the primitive creatures they had first appeared to be. Still, they were clearly inferior to Vextari intelligence and technology. The female's death had provided valuable information about human biological limits. Soon they would begin experiments on the male prisoner as well. Veltar was absorbed in his work when the laboratory door burst open with a loud crash. Scientist Kexum stumbled into the room, his usually calm demeanor completely shattered. The younger Vextari's large black eyes were wide with terror, and his gray skin had taken on an even paler shade. Commander Kexum gasped, struggling to catch his breath. "You must come to the laboratory immediately. Something impossible is happening." Veltar set down his tablet with irritation. What could be so urgent? The human female is dead. Her body is being prepared for biological analysis. No, Commander Kexum shook his head frantically. You do not understand. The body, the human body is ... It is changing. Intrigued, despite his annoyance, Veltar followed his subordinate back to the main laboratory. Other Vextari scientists had gathered around the security monitors, all of them speaking in hushed, frightened voices. When they saw their commander approaching, they quickly moved aside to give him a clear view of the screens. What Veltar saw made his blood run cold. Elena Rodriguez's dead body, which had been lying motionless on the examination table, was now glowing with a soft blue-white light. The radiance pulsed gently, like a heartbeat made of pure energy. Their instruments were going crazy, showing energy readings that should have been impossible for any organic life form. When did this begin? Veltar demanded, watching the impossible sight on the screen. 7 minutes ago, Commander, replied another scientist. The energy readings started small, but they have been growing stronger every minute. Our equipment cannot measure the upper limits of what we are detecting. Veltar checked the time display. It was exactly 3:24 station time. He quickly calculated in his head and realized that 37 minutes had passed since the human female's death. The timing seemed too precise to be a coincidence, but he could not imagine what it might mean. On the security feed, Elena's body suddenly drew in a sharp, deep breath. Her chest rose and fell as if she had never stopped breathing. Then her eyes opened, and every Vextari in the room took a step backward in fear. These were not the same eyes that had closed in death 37 minutes earlier. Where once there had been simple human intelligence and defiance, now there seemed to be depths of knowledge that stretched beyond anything Veltar could comprehend. It was as if Alina Rodriguez was looking at them through windows that opened onto infinite space and time. When she spoke, her voice was different too. It carried strange harmonics that seemed to vibrate through the metal walls of the ship itself. The sound made every Vex Story present feel uncomfortable, as if the very air around them had become charged with unknown energy. "Hello, Velta," Alina said, sitting up on the examination table, as if waking from a pleasant nap. "We need to talk." Veltar felt his throat constrict with fear. The human should not have known his name. During the torture, none of his people had spoken it in her presence. Yet she had addressed him directly, with a familiarity that suggested she knew far more about him than any prisoner should, in his energy cage across the room. Captain Jake Morrison watched in stunned amazement. He had been preparing himself to mourn his colleague and friend, and now Alina was sitting up and talking as if nothing had happened. But even from a distance, Jake could see that something fundamental had changed about her. She moved with a confidence and grace that seemed almost supernatural. Alina stood up from the examination table and walked toward her energy prison. The Vex Story scientists scrambled to activate their weapons, but something strange happened. Their targeting systems could not seem to lock onto Alina properly. The energy beams passed through empty air, where she appeared to be standing, as if she existed in a slightly different reality than the rest of them. She reached the energy cage that held her before her death, and simply walked through it. The powerful barriers that had contained her earlier offered no resistance at all. Alina stepped out of the prison as easily as walking through an open doorway. "How is this possible?" Veltar demanded, backing away from this impossible human, who should have been dead. "What manner of technology do you possess?" Alina smiled, but the expression was no longer entirely human. There was something ancient and knowing in that smile, something that spoke of experiences far beyond what any single person should have been able to accumulate in one lifetime. "Death is not the end for us, Commander," she said, her voice still, carrying those strange harmonics that made the ship's hull vibrate. "For humans, death is just a very brief trip home, and now that I have returned from that journey, I have brought back gifts that you cannot possibly understand." The implications of her words sent waves of terror through every Vex Story present. They had thought they were dealing with a primitive species, but now they faced something that challenged their most basic understanding of life and death itself. Alina walked through the corridors of the alien ship with confidence that seemed impossible for someone who had just returned from death. Every step she took was purposeful, as if she had studied the ship's layout for years. The Vex Story crew members who encountered her pressed themselves against the walls, their black eyes wide with terror and confusion. She approached a security panel that controlled access to the bridge. Without hesitation, Alina placed her hand on the alien control surface. The device, which should have required Vex Story DNA to activate, immediately responded to her touch. Complex symbols appeared on the screen, and she manipulated them with the skill of someone who had designed the system herself. Behind her, Commander Veltar and his scientists followed at a careful distance. They watched in growing alarm as Alina effortlessly bypassed security measures that had taken their best engineers decades to develop. She moved through the ship as if it belonged to her, opening doors and accessing systems that should have been impossible for any outsider to understand. "How does she know our technology?" whispered scientist Kexum, his voice trembling with fear. "She was never given access to our computer systems." Alina paused and turned to face the group of aliens following her. When she spoke, it was in perfect Vex Story language, using complex grammatical structures that even their own children took years to master. Her pronunciation was flawless, with none of the awkward sounds that other species made when attempting their speech. "Your language is quite beautiful," she said in their native tongue. "I particularly appreciate the subtle emotional undertones in your verb conjugations. It shows a remarkable sophistication in expressing complex feelings." The Vex Story stared at her in shock. Alina had never heard their language before her death. During the torture, they had only spoken to her in English. Yet now she spoke as if she had grown up among their people. Alina switched back to English and continued walking toward the main assembly hall, where most of the crew had gathered. Word of the impossible human had spread quickly through the ship, and hundreds of Vextari waited in nervous silence to see what would happen next. "You want to understand human resilience?" Alina asked as she entered the large chamber. Her voice carried clearly to every corner of the room, without any need for amplification systems. "You tortured me to learn about human strength, but you discovered something far more significant than you could have imagined. Let me explain what you have stumbled into." Alina raised her hand, and something extraordinary happened. The air around her began to shimmer, and complex holographic equations appeared floating in the space above the assembled crowd. The mathematical formulas were unlike anything the Vextari had ever seen, involving concepts that pushed the boundaries of their most advanced scientific theories. The alien scientists gasped as they recognized fragments of quantum mechanics, mixed with dimensional physics that their people had only theorized about. The equations showed relationships between consciousness and energy that challenged everything they thought they knew about the nature of existence. Every human consciousness is connected to something we call the network, Alina explained as the holographic displays shifted and changed to illustrate her words. It is a quantum field that exists across multiple dimensions, linking every human mind that has ever existed. When we die, we do not simply stop existing. Instead, our consciousness joins this vast collective of knowledge and experience. Commander Veltar's throat pouch, a physical feature that indicated extreme stress among his species, began to flutter rapidly. "That is impossible," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "No known species in the galaxy possesses such abilities. Our scientists have studied consciousness for centuries, and nothing like what you describe has ever been documented." Alina smiled with a patience that seemed ancient. "Most humans live their entire lives without knowing about the network. We go through our daily existence, feeling separate and alone, unaware of the vast connection that binds us all together. But death changes everything. Death opens the door to understanding what we truly are." She gestured again, and the holographic display showed a representation of time itself. "The 37 minutes you observed is not arbitrary or random. That is precisely how long it takes for human consciousness to travel through the quantum pathways and touch the network. During that time, we experience the accumulated knowledge and wisdom of every human who has ever lived." Jake Morrison, who had been brought to the assembly hall still trapped in his energy cage, felt something strange happening in his mind. It was as if invisible doors were slowly opening, revealing rooms in his consciousness that he never knew existed. Memories that were not his own began to surface, along with knowledge and skills he had never learned. "Most humans who reach the network choose to remain there," Alina continued. "Why would anyone want to return to the limited existence of a single body when they could be part of something infinite and eternal? But sometimes, when the need is great enough, some of us choose to come back, and when we do, we bring fragments of that vast knowledge with us." The holographic displays now showed patterns of connection spreading across the galaxy, linking points of light that represented human settlements and ships. The web of connections pulsed with energy, showing active communication between distant points. Commander Veltar took a step backward, his gray skin growing even paler as he began to understand the implications of what Alina was showing them. "What have you done to us?" he whispered, his voice barely audible in the large chamber. Alina's expression changed, becoming cold and hard. The patience and understanding disappeared from her face, replaced by something that spoke of justice and retribution. "You tortured one of us to death, Commander. You subjected me to 37 minutes of agony for your scientific curiosity. But what you failed to understand is that every experience in the network is shared. Every moment of pain, every instant of suffering, becomes part of the collective memory The holographic display shifted to show energy pulses spreading outward from their current location, reaching human settlements across vast distances of space. Right now, at this very moment, every human within 1,000 light-years knows exactly what you did to me. They have experienced every second of the torture you inflicted. The network remembers everything, Commander, and it does not forgive those who harm its children. The effect began like ripples spreading across a calm pond after someone drops a stone into the water. Across the vast reaches of human space, something extraordinary was happening. People who had been going about their normal daily lives suddenly stopped what they were doing as Elena's torture and death flooded through their minds with perfect clarity. On Earth, Admiral Susan Hayes was sitting in her command center, reviewing routine patrol reports when the experience hit her like a physical blow. She straightened in her chair so quickly that her coffee cup fell to the floor, shattering on the metal deck. Her eyes went wide as she suddenly lived through 37 minutes of alien torture, feeling every moment of pain that Elena had endured. But it was not just the torture that filled her mind. Along with the memory of suffering came something else entirely. Military tactics she had never studied, knowledge of alien technology she had never seen, and strategic information about species humanity had never encountered. It was as if someone had downloaded the combined wisdom of every human military leader who had ever lived directly into her brain. "All stations, battle alert," she commanded, her voice carrying new authority. "Prepare the fleet for immediate deployment. We have people to rescue." On Mars Colony, engineer Tom Bradley was explaining a fusion reactor problem to his apprentices when he suddenly stopped speaking mid-sentence. His eyes took on the same distant look as Admiral Hayes, and, when he spoke again, his voice carried knowledge that should have been impossible for him to possess. "The Vextari use quantum containment fields for their energy weapons," he said, though he had never heard of the Vextari before. "Their shields operate on a rotating frequency that can be disrupted if you know the right harmonic patterns." His apprentices stared at him in confusion, wondering how their instructor had suddenly become an expert on alien technology that humanity had never encountered. Similar scenes played out across dozens of worlds and space stations. Scientists suddenly understood physics principles they had never studied. Pilots found themselves knowing flight maneuvers for ships they had never seen. Doctors gained knowledge of alien biology and chemistry that could save human lives in ways they had never imagined. The human response was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Ships that had been scattered across dozens of different star systems began moving with purpose and coordination that defied explanation. Captains who had never met each other and had no way to communicate across such vast distances somehow knew exactly where to go and what to do. The UE Defiance changed course from its patrol route near Proxima Centauri. The Mars Defense Fleet launched from their orbital stations. Colony ships that had never seen combat suddenly began moving toward the same destination with military precision. It was as if an invisible hand was guiding every human vessel in space toward a single point. Aboard the Vextari ship, Dark Conscience, Commander Veltar watched his tactical displays with growing terror. The first human ship had appeared at the edge of their star system exactly 3 hours after Elena's return from death. Within the next hour, 16 more vessels had arrived, taking positions that his military computers could not predict or counter. "Commander," reported his tactical officer, "the human ships are moving in formation patterns that are not in our database. Our defense protocols cannot calculate their next moves." Veltar studied the display screens with increasing panic. The human ships were not just moving randomly. They were executing complex military maneuvers that suggested decades of joint training and coordination. Yet according to Vextari intelligence, human space forces were scattered and poorly organized, with different colonies operating independently. "This is impossible," Veltar stammered, his gray hands shaking as he tried to understand what he was seeing. "They cannot coordinate across such vast distances. There is no communication technology that works instantly across light years of space. Alina, who had been standing quietly in the command center, began to glow more brightly. The air around her seemed to vibrate with energy, creating a low humming sound that resonated through the ship's hull. When she smiled, it was with the sadness of someone who understood the terrible consequences of actions that could not be undone. "Distance means nothing to the network, Commander," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made every Vextari on the bridge step backward in fear. "You still do not understand what you have done. When you killed me, you did not just murder one human being. You sent a message directly to every human consciousness that has ever existed." She gestured toward the tactical displays showing the approaching human fleet. "Right now, the captain of every one of those ships knows the exact specifications of your weapons. They understand the weaknesses in your armor plating. They can predict your tactical responses because the network contains the memories of every battle ever fought by any human who has ever lived." Jake Morrison, still trapped in his energy cage, but now feeling his consciousness expanding in ways he had never imagined, suddenly understood what was happening. His mind was touching other minds across the galaxy, sharing thoughts and experiences with humans he had never met. For the first time in his life, he truly comprehended what it meant to be part of something greater than himself. "We know your ship's structural weaknesses," Alina continued, her voice growing colder. "We know the location of your homeworld and the deployment patterns of your defense fleets. We even know your personal fears and the names of your family members. Veltar, the dead remember everything, and they have shared that knowledge with the living." The Vextari had believed they were dealing with a primitive species that could be easily dominated through superior technology and cruel intimidation. Instead, they had awakened something that had been sleeping in humanity since their species first looked up at the stars and dreamed of traveling between them. They had discovered that what they thought was humanity's greatest weakness, their mortality, was actually their most devastating strength. As more human ships continued to arrive at the edge of the system, Veltar realized that his people had made a mistake that might doom their entire civilization. 3 months had passed since the day that changed everything. The morning sun of Vextari Prime cast long shadows across the alien city as Alina Rodriguez stood in the newly built embassy of the network. The building was a marvel of both human and Vextari architecture, with flowing curves that seemed to blend the organic designs favored by humans with the precise geometric patterns that the Vextari preferred. From her office window, Alina could see the busy streets below where humans and Vextari walked together for the first time in their species' histories. Children of both races played in the parks, their laughter creating sounds that had never been heard before on this ancient world. The sight filled Alina with a deep sense of satisfaction, though she knew the road to this peace had been paid for with suffering. The war, if it could even be called that, had lasted only 3 weeks. It was not a conflict decided by superior weapons or advanced technology. Instead, it had been won through something far more powerful than any military force the galaxy had ever seen. Every human who participated in the fighting had access to the memories and experiences of every battle ever fought by their species. Soldiers knew tactics they had never learned. Pilots flew maneuvers they had never practiced. Engineers built weapons using knowledge that came from the collective wisdom of all humanity. The Vextari, despite their advanced technology and military experience, found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. Human forces coordinated across vast distances with perfect timing, as if they were all part of a single vast organism. No matter what strategy the Vextari employed, the humans already knew how to counter it, because someone, somewhere in their history, had faced something similar. Alina heard soft footsteps behind her and turned to see a familiar figure approaching, with careful, hesitant movements. Commander Veltar looked very different from the confident scientist who had tortured her months ago. He had been stripped of his rank and position, though he was alive only because Alina had personally intervened to prevent his execution when the human fleet had captured the Dark Conscience. "Dr. Rodriguez," he said quietly, using the respectful title that he had learned humans preferred. "I hope I am not disturbing your work." Alina studied the former commander with eyes that still held depths of knowledge that seemed to stretch across galaxies. Since her return from death, she had never quite looked entirely human. There was something ancient and knowing in her gaze, as if she carried the wisdom of countless lifetimes within her single body. "You are not disturbing me, Velta," she replied, gesturing for him to join her by the window. "I have been expecting this conversation for some time." Veltar moved closer, but maintained a respectful distance. His gray skin had lost some of its metallic shine, and his large black eyes showed emotions that his species rarely displayed openly. Shame, regret, and confusion warred across his features as he struggled to find the right words. "I still do not understand," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "How long have your people possessed this ability?" "Our scientists studied human history before making contact. There was no evidence of anything like what we witnessed during the conflict." Alina turned back to the window, watching as a group of human children taught Vextory youngsters how to play a simple ball game. "We have always had this connection," she said softly. "From the very first human who looked up at the stars and wondered what lay beyond them, we have been part of something greater than ourselves. But most humans live their entire lives without knowing about the network." She paused, her fingers tracing patterns on the window glass that seemed to glow faintly under her touch. "Death is the key that unlocks what we truly are. Your torture did not create something new in humanity. It simply awakened something that was always there, waiting to be discovered." Veltar's throat pouch fluttered nervously as he processed her words. "But if this ability has always existed, why did your people never use it before? Why did humans fight wars against each other instead of working together?" Alina smiled sadly. "Because knowing about the network and being able to access it while alive are two very different things. Most humans who die choose to remain in the network rather than return to the limited existence of a single body. Those of us who come back carry only fragments of the greater knowledge, and even that fades with time unless we work to maintain the connection." She turned to face Veltar directly, and he saw in her expression both infinite compassion and terrible power. It was the look of someone who had touched the divine and returned to share that experience with others. "Every species in this galaxy will have to accept a new reality now," she continued. "Humans are not just another race that has learned to travel between the stars. We are individual nodes in a consciousness network that transcends death itself. The network remembers every act of kindness and every moment of cruelty. It learns from every sacrifice made and every victory achieved through the embassy's advanced communication systems." Alina could feel the thoughts and emotions of humans scattered across the galaxy, colonists on distant worlds who were building new homes under alien suns, explorers pushing into uncharted regions of space where no human had ever traveled, scientists making discoveries that would benefit all species. All of them were connected, all part of something infinitely greater than the sum of their individual parts. "What happens now?" Veltar asked, his voice filled with uncertainty about the future. Alina smiled, and for a brief moment, she looked entirely human again. The ancient wisdom in her eyes softened, replaced by the warmth and hope that had always been part of her personality. "Now we explore the stars together," she said simply. "Humans and Vextari, working side by side to discover what wonders await us in the vast universe. But remember this day, Veltar. Remember that humanity's true strength does not come from our weapons, or our ships, or our technology. It comes from the simple fact that none of us ever truly dies alone." Even as she spoke, Alina could sense Jake Morrison, now promoted to Admiral Morrison, leading the first joint human Vextari exploration fleet toward the outer rim of the galaxy. The network hummed with anticipation, carrying the dreams and hopes of both species toward whatever incredible discoveries awaited them among the distant stars. The galaxy would never be the same.